Okay. Hey guys, welcome. My name is Sipke.
Sipke, thank you.
You're welcome. It's my privilege to do this session on layouts, which is a new feature with as of version 1.9. I just wanted to. Probably most of you have used it already since it ships out of the box. It's enabled out of the box, but this gives me a nice opportunity to walk you guys through it and show some of the goodies it has, which you may not be aware of. First of all, why did we add it? In the end, what you can do with it, it's just a way for users to put a bunch of shapes onto the screen. But we already have systems like placement. We have widgets. But for example, placement, it's a tool for theme developers to put shapes onto screens in certain zones, which doesn't give the user editor control over the location. So that's not useful to end users. But we have widgets for that, which works great, except for the fact that it doesn't give you the... There are scenarios where you want to put widgets in certain columns, certain zones, and what you end up oftentimes on certain websites is one layer per page, which isn't ideal. And there's solutions for that. There's a module from iDeliverable that enables you to create widgets per page, but it's not ideal. It's actually kind of messy. We needed a way for users to be able to put shapes onto an element, and this layouts feature, it's not to be confused with widgets. It's not a replacement. It's more of a way for content to be divided into columns if you want to. It's actually more of an elements engine, which we'll see in a moment, where you just put a bunch of elements onto a canvas, and one of those element types is a grid, and that enables you to create grid layouts. We'll have a look at that next. This is an example of our website, iDeliverable, where we use the layout editor to create the homepage. I think this is a good example of when you would want to use it. Another good example is the out-of-box Orchard website itself. As you can see here, originally you see the triple first, second, and third widgets you may recognize, but these aren't widgets anymore. These are 3 columns of a single layout. And in the back end, it looks like this. So this is the default homepage of Orchard. And as you can see, this used to be the body part, which has been replaced with a part called layout part. And it consists of a canvas, which is this gray area here. I can highlight it. And we have a toolbox here to the right. And this toolbox is a list of available elements which you can use to create your content. The most simplest of content types or content elements is the HTML one, which you would use instead of the body part if you want to offer the user the ability to create more complex layouts. And as you can see here, the canvas consists of a grid element, which itself consists of 2 rows, and the second row consisting of 3 columns. So this is a very easy way for users to work with layouts, which in the past you would have to use widgets. And if you just have one page with 3 columns, you would have to create 3 widgets for just that page and a single layer for that page. So I'll just walk you through a bunch of those elements. Just showed you a few. These snippets are HTML elements, which have an editor. There's a little edit glyph here. And as you can see, this is, in this case, using Tiny Mice. It is leveraging the filter system of Orchard. So if you, actually, I'm wrong. That used to be the case. This is a dedicated HTML filter. If you wanted to use Markdown, for example, that's a feature you would enable. It's called the Markdown element, and that would appear in this list here. Actually, I'll show you. For example, here's the Markdown element, which I'll enable, and then we'll have another element type here called Markdown. And as you can see, you can drag and drop those elements onto the canvas, and then the editor will automatically pop up. And this is full Markdown support. And then it appears here. So very, I think, simple way for users to work with content. But of course, this wouldn't be a true Orchard layout, true Orchard module if it weren't extensible. And of course, this set of elements is fully extensible with your own widgets, with your own element types. Yeah, one type of element that I think is interesting is the snippet, the shape element under the snippets category. And the shape element enables you to, especially interesting for themers, I think, where you, as a themer, you create a bunch of razor files whose name end in snippet. And then they will automatically appear under the snippets category, and this is how it looks like. I downloaded a theme called Bootstrap from Philip, and I created a subfolder called Elements. And then here's a razor file, and whose file name ends in snippet. And I just took a jumbotron, which is a typical Bootstrap element. Which reminds me, I should probably enable that theme here. Yeah, so that's enabled. So refreshing this editor should now show up that, should show that snippet. It didn't. Maybe that's a feature. Usually is just a feature that needs to be enabled. Yeah, so when we enable this feature, layout snippets, we'll see an element here called Jumbotron. There you go. And this is, I found this particularly useful when setting up new websites based on a Bootstrap theme, where you just want some elements to be placeable by users, and without having to write a piece of code, which you can do, of course. You can, we'll get to that in a bit, where you can write pretty advanced custom elements yourself. There you go. This is the snippet I just added to this custom theme called Bootstrap. So as I just mentioned, layouts and elements, they're a way to organize shapes onto a content page. they're not a way for you to put elements into all other zones. For that, you have widgets. But of course, there's a layout widget which you can place into those zones so that those zones become layoutable, if you will. So that could be useful. Another useful part is blueprints. Blueprint is a pre-configured element. Sometimes websites have little snippets of content that you may want to reuse. And for that, you would go to the Elements section here, where you can create an element based on an existing one. For example, taking the HTML element as a base. This could be company info as the display name. The type name would be the technical name, which you could refer to from tokens, for example. And a category which is optional, we'll call that harvest. So now that we created this element blueprint, we can use it in our site everywhere. For example, if we created a new page about Orchard, we could start from scratch using those elements here, using the HTML element, for example. But in this case, we want our custom element here called company info. And there you go. So this is reusable. You can change the definition of this element, and then the change would be reflected everywhere where this element is used. So that's useful. And then when we're using content, there's another way to reuse layouts, and it's called a layout template. And if you're familiar with web forms, you probably know about master layouts or master pages. This is not quite it, but conceptually it's similar, where you have a master layout which you apply to your content pages. For example, a typical layout would be a grid with a row and a column, and maybe another row with 2 columns. And maybe here you would put a caption of your website, for example, the image element. We'll just import a logo, and actually let's add a vector element. Vector image, which is new as well. So let's say this is the title of the website. Here we have 2 columns, which we leave empty as placeholders. So we'll give this a name called master layout. And now we can use that layout in all of our layout pages. For example, let's say we wanted to use that layout here. There's a section called use existing layout, and it will just apply to it. And then your page-specific content, you just paste in the placeholder containers. Such in this case, it's a column. And the nice thing about this is hierarchical, so you could create a hierarchy of template layouts. And whenever you make a change to one of those layouts, that change will be reflected across all the content pages. Actually, let me show you the front end, how that looks. So there you go, here's the title. It's small because that's the way it renders by default. Vector images using the image tag. That's another thing you can use as well using the layout editor. Let's change this using what is called, I don't think we have the name for this. I think it's element properties. You could provide an inline style here, for example, width 100%. Save that. And when we refresh now, that inline CSS gets applied. So and there's quite a few elements already here. And a question we often see on the forums is, what about widgets? Could we place widgets onto, onto this canvas? And currently, with the current release, there's no such way. You could extend the module with your own module and provide your own set of elements. But what if you have a set of existing widgets? For that, we would have to implement something custom called, what I call the widget harvester. The elements you see here are provided by harvesters, if you will, or element providers is a different name. And we've been experimenting with a widget harvester. And what we see here, based on the existing list of widget types in the system, it yields a set of elements. For example, the menu widget is shown here. So that means you could drag and drop a widget element onto a layout, give that a name. What we see here is the widget editor shape. So this is not provided by the element provider itself. It just delegates that job to the widget drivers. Let's call this the menu element. For menu, main menu, and hit save. Position. Well, that's a bug because the position UI is hidden, but we can't provide a value currently. I knew I shouldn't have merged in the recent changes. Yeah, okay. So maybe later I can show you that in person. Oh, yeah, that's, I think, a fairly recent addition, element rules. Don't think it's part of 190, but 191 or even 2, where you can, similar to widget rules, you can control the visibility of an element itself on using rules. So, for example, let's say this title we only want to display when you're authenticated. There's a visibility rule here, and we can use the authenticated rule, which means show this element if this rule evaluates to true. So saving that. If we refresh the home page, it's visible when we sign out. That was the wrong menu item. Now it's gone. So could be a useful feature. Depending on your use case scenarios. Yeah, very important aspect of course of layouts is it's the grid where the user can lay out content into a bootstrap-like grid, and it comes with a default grid system, if you will. But if you're already using a bootstrap-enabled theme, you probably want to use the Bootstrap-specific classes. If we look at this page here, let's sign back in. If we inspect this element, we can see span 6, which is not Bootstrap 3. This is from a CSS grid originally written by Sebastian, tweaked a little bit for this module. But in Orchard, I think 3 uses a different name for these columns, and it's very compatible. So what I'm going to show next is how to take advantage of Bootstrap by overriding a bunch of element shapes. And I prepared that here as part of this Bootstrap theme. And actually, I should show you first how those element views look like from the layouts module, because that would be the, whenever you overwrite something, it would be good to just copy and paste those elements and then make a change to them. So that's here. The module itself is orchard layouts, views, elements. And that's the, for themers, it's good to know that the shape type is called element. And what we see here are actually alternates of those, of the element shape. So for example, the grid here, it's the element type is grid, but the shape type is element. Or actually elements, that's the technical name. Yeah, so back to the theme here. What I did, I created this folder elements and then copied it in grid CSHTML. And the reason you would want to override that is to provide a CSS class. This is Bootstrap specific container fluid, or just container, whatever you need. And the column view. You would want to override that so that you can use the Bootstrap specific CSS classes, in this case call SM or call MD, depending on your needs. Yeah, this is the offset specific and the column width here. So the information like column span, offset, that's provided to you through the model of the view, and then you just use it and access it. And that's in this case, it's the only change you have to make. I didn't show the offsetting, which is cool. I just changed those file names, so it's building in the background. So here we see column 6. Column 6, we can drag this, resize it using drag drop, and we can use control the offset of the columns using this little, not that one, but this one here. You see now we are increasing the offset, and that information is provided through the shape. If we save this, and refresh this about page, as you can see in the element inspector, it's now using those class names that we provided. And that's really all there is to using layouts with a Bootstrap theme. As you can see, it's using the container fluid class here on this container. These are the rows, which we didn't have to override. You could if you wanted to. So yeah, not that hard. Oh yeah, that's another thing. If we are here on the home page, actually, where's the title? So yeah, that's another element type. It's the part elements, which is provided by another element harvester. It's in this category here. We see title part and comment part by default. And let's say we wanted to control the parts here using the layout editor. We could. I just show that using this section here. We would just hide the title part shape here, and then use this special display type called layout, which has been introduced. And what that does is retargets, if you will, the display type for those shapes, and the layout feature knows about that one. And it's used for this title element here. So whenever this element renders, it knows about the display type called layout. And this way you can add as much as you like. You can place them anywhere you want. So that gives you a little bit more control over certain content parts. So the data for this part is still managed using the layout, the part editors, but the placement is now controlled by this layout. So that's, yeah, that's flexible. There you go. Okay, so one more type I will show you. I won't show you every type, but that's the shape element, which is here. All it asks for is the name of a shape. So if you have a theme with a certain shape, you can just type it in here. But you could also use this in combination with the templates module, which we can enable here. Through modules, we'll enable templates. Which adds a new menu item here called templates. And this could be, for example, harvest sample shape. That would be the shape name. And this is just enable the Razor implementation. So here you can use Razor code. So you could say things like some HTML and some Razor code here, for example, X, which would be a variable. So now we have a shape name called harvest sample shape. And then refreshing the editor here, we'll add a shape element, use that shape name. Now it's here on the editor, and then on the front end. We have our custom shape here. So there's lots of flexibility with those element types. Of course, there will be times where you want more specialized elements that are specific to your requirements. And for that, you would have to write some code. And there's a very simple API. It's called the element class that you can inherit from. I'll show you how it's done using a simple element example here called inbox badge, and that's just based on the Bootstrap badge HTML. And the idea here is that it would show you the label that would be customizable by the user and the number of messages implemented by this count property. And what we see here, this is just a class that inherits from the class element, which lives in the Orchard Layouts Framework Elements namespace here, which comes from the Layouts module. So obviously I added a reference to the Orchard Layouts module here so that we could reference this class. This is the only required property to implement. It's the category, and the category matches the toolbox category here. So we would have a Bootstrap category here once we enable this feature. For this demo, I created a module called Orchard Harvest 2015, so we'll just enable that. Here it is. And now we go back to our page. And there it is. There's our inbox badge shape, which we can drag and drop anywhere, in theory. Oh, this is, yeah, so this is good to know. It's when you use the layout, those elements themselves aren't editable, so we should, in this case, go to our layout and make the changes here. So I didn't show you everything. This is just one part. This is the model, if you will, of the elements. But oftentimes you want the user to be able to configure those properties. For that, you would implement a driver, which is very similar to implementing a content part driver. So here we have a folder drivers and a driver for this element. And there's various ways to implement this editor, but it all boils down to just providing an editor shape, very similar to a content editor shape. But I took it one step further by also allowing you to use the Forms API. So you could implement editors without having to create view files. So it simplifies it a bit. In this case, I inherited from the Forms element driver, which just uses the Forms API to build the edit shape. So there's not too much going on here, but it allows you to, as an implementer, just providing the form names here, and then also overriding the describe form method on the iForms provider interface. So this is code only, so what we see here, no views required, just describing a field set shape. So that is important. It's not the form shape because that is provided by the editor screen itself. You just provide your field sets and some shapes. In this case, a text box called badge label. Now this is important. The name property here matches the name of this method here. Using an extension method to get some information from a dictionary using a helper. Also inspired by the retrieve, store extension methods when implementing content part drivers. So that should match up. So we can now provide some values here, a value here, and then publish this. And for the value, I just implemented a random generator in the driver here, just to demonstrate that you can use services to fetch your data. And that's by implementing the onDisplaying method on the driver, and invoking a service here, inbox service, get message count, and then I assigned that to a property on the element shape, which is provided by you, and that represents the shape being rendered on the canvas here. Yeah, so that's basically what you need to do to implement your custom elements. There's a more advanced way to implement that by implementing a harvester, and that's more or less a way to dynamically yield the element types, which, for example, the widget elements is implemented as such, and the part elements, it's all provided by element harvesters. And of course, this is extensible, as you've just seen, but you can also reuse some of the parts. For example, if you implemented your own element type, and you wanted to use it as a widget, you could do that using the element wrapper part, which is a content part that you attach to your custom type. So let's say we just showed the inbox badge. Let's say we want to turn that into a widget. We would go to content definition and create a new type called inbox badge widget. And then all you need to attach is the widget part because it's a widget and the element wrapper part. And the element wrapper part, it takes a single configuration field called element type name, and this will be the name of your element, in this case inbox batch. So this is the technical name of your property. This also works with element blueprints. So if you created an element blueprint with a technical name, that's the name you would specify here. And of course, it's a widget, so the stereotype needs to be widget. It would not be creatable, not listable, maybe draftable and securable. And now when we go to widgets, we can add a new type called inbox batch widget. I probably made a typo because I expected the label field to be here. Let's have a quick look. Oh, when you use a class, you need to provide the fully qualified class name of that type. So it's not just inbox batch, you need to provide the namespace as well. So I'll quickly fix here. There you go. It's categorized underneath the element properties here. We need to provide a name. And there it is, our inbox batch with sample messages label. So yeah, there's that's not even it. There's another way to use elements. You can use a element token, which is, well, if you're familiar with tokens, they can be used in, for example, the body part or even in HTML elements, and they are replaced at runtime. There's with the layout feature, there comes a feature called element tokens, which means you can render an element inside of a piece of text. For example, this text here, if we can, actually this is the Jumbotron, so we can change that. That was hard-coded. But if we go to the home page and we edit this piece, we can now use a token called element. This is the syntax, the element.display, colon, and then the technical name of your element. So we had a custom element here. Called company name. So that's the name we use here. Save that. We see here the token representation. And then on the front end, we should see that here somewhere. So, here it is. Hello Orchard. And this works for any type of element. So this is just a simple piece of text, but even if you have some graphical stuff, that would work as well. For example, the snippet we created, that would work nicely. So lots of ways to use it. Good question. I think I provided the syntax for that. Let me have a quick look.
Can you include settings?
So I'll repeat the question. The question from Bertrand is, can you include settings for those elements? Let me have a very quick look. Because I thought of it, but I'm not sure I actually pursued that. No, that's yet to be done. We would have to think of a proper syntax. It seemed a bit tricky back then. What you can do, of course, is create an element blueprint, configure it there, and then use that element name. Let's see where we are here. What's that? Yeah. Want to say something about potential future of layouts. I just briefly mentioned it using widgets. It's called placeable content, where currently we have the world of widgets. Now we have the world of layouts and elements. Elements seems very nice because you can drag and drop content anywhere in the page where you like. So a question we get once in a while is could this replace widgets? Could we use this to position the menu, for example? At this point, you could not, because what widgets has, which elements doesn't, is a notion of layer rules. Widgets show up whenever a layer rule evaluates to true, and layouts are tied to content items. So that wouldn't work at this point, but we are talking about a way where we unify the two worlds, where you can use elements to drag and drop them into zones, and then those elements would show up whenever the layer rule evaluates to true. But you still want to be able to place contents, and that's what widgets are. It's just little content items that you place in various zones. We still need that, of course, even if we unify that. And a way to do that is to just make content placeable, or one way to have those content types appear in the toolbox, and then you could just drag and drop those. For example, the page type, you could just drag it and drop it into a container. That's something we're currently prototyping. It's called placeable content. Another improvement would be the layout editor itself. Currently we have elements called grid, row, column. But if you look at WPF, if you're familiar with that, they have different types of containers. They have grid, but they also have stack panel and flow panel. And we actually, we want to simplify that, where you can just drag a container, for example, stack panel, and you don't have to be bothered by rows and columns, but you would just be able to drag and drop any types of element, and then using a notion of attached properties, you would set columns if applicable to that type of container. But these are just ideas currently that we have. Bertrand wrote some nice blog posts on ORCID layouts and extensibility. Definitely check those out. I wrote a little blog post on layouts, which explains how you can use it, how you can extend it. Recommended read. That's it in a nutshell. If there's any questions.
Yeah, question going back to the visibility portion of the
You mean the
elements?
visibility layer rules?
Yes. So you said you wrote down authenticated. Could that be any role on the website, or are there specific subsets for those rules?
Depends on the layer rule provider. It's leveraging that system. So if the authenticated rule expects some parameters, then you would provide them there as well. I don't think authenticated itself accepts any arguments. Maybe there's a rule provider that does accept role names. If not, you could implement that as a rule provider and then leverage it. Yeah. And what's also nice, it works on any element. So if you applied it to the grid element, that would make all of its children invisible as well, of course.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Lunch? Thank you.
Thanks.